Good evening, and welcome to the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club's Sunday night Science and Technology Net. It's 8 p.m., and we meet here every Sunday, at least as long as we're all available, to discuss science and technology, not always ham radio related, but hopefully interesting to the listeners and the participants. Let me drop and see if there's any emergency traffic. If anybody needs the repeater in an emergency, please come now. Well, nothing heard. Once again, this is Neil, W2NDG, and you're on the OMARC Sunday Night Science and Technology Net. If you would like to participate, obviously if you're hearing me, you're already listening, but we also have a YouTube stream. But if you'd like to participate on the radio, it's 146.805 megahertz with a negative 600 kilohertz shift and a PL tone of 103.5 hertz. If you'd like to watch online, you can Google W2NDG, Science and Technology. That's W2NDG, Science and Technology. You can just hit that up in Google or on YouTube and throw something in the chat. I already see Aaron here throwing stuff in the chat. So anyway, tonight, I did have some subjects planned for future nets as we started up again after my break. I'm going to pause that tonight only because I'm just exhausted. I'd rather be firing on all cylinders for one of these subjects, but probably next weekend, next Sunday, we're going to discuss RF energy. It's an interesting topic. It really is. There was a project I ran into, a patent for a guy who had invented a device for recovering electrical energy from radio waves and using them. So we're just going to discuss how much energy there is in radio waves and how it's harnessed and what it's used for and how you can demonstrate it. So, but that'll be next week. This week I decided on open discussion, and if you want to know why I'm so tired today, I won't make this a commercial for my wife's business because we're not supposed to do that stuff. But we were vending all weekend at Stormville. This was the opening weekend for the Stormville Flea Market. I'm wearing a T-shirt from today's event from her business. So if you're on YouTube and you're looking, that's the crazy cat face you see is our business logo. So. Yes, Joe, always safe to talk about cats. And if we play our cards right, one of them may come to visit us tonight. Frequently, Olive jumps up in my lap and either tries to talk on the radio or tries to groom my head. But the face is based on a cat Jill and I used to have named Cleo. She was an elderly, not elderly, but much older, handicapped cat. And this was my daughter Amy's rendition of what she looked like after having catnip. So, having explained the T-shirt to those of you who might be watching, either now or later, I want to see if Jim's out there, because I have a special request of Jim tonight. So, K2BHM, are you with us tonight?
Let me double check. Yep, I'm here. A little bit behind schedule because we had a phone call from relatives that we had to deal with, but I'm just finishing up dinner, and I'm here. K2BHM.
All right. Well, thanks. And basically, at some point here, if you guys want to keep going, I may actually cut out because I have one or two things to do, and then I really probably need to get some sleep tonight, a little earlier than normal. But I think I can try to keep going at least for an hour, which our shorter nets aren't much different than that. So, but if I happen to fall asleep sitting in front of the computer here, please take over. So thanks, Jim. And yeah, open topic tonight. Although, if anything develops after check-ins or Jim has something, that's fine. We can go whatever direction you want. If Jim wants to lead us that way, I'll leave that to him. One thing I was noticing, which I'll mention, which is, we'll talk about anything here, but let me drop. I was thinking about spring and, all of the new growth outside. And one of these things that got me thinking about it was I've started growing some of my own food in the house again, in the form of sprouts and microgreens. And I'm always fascinated by that part of the growth cycle. The germination of seeds and that first, part of growth. It's interesting to me that, a seed turns into this. And just like with animals, very, very, very early formation of, animal embryos is hard to distinguish from one to another. And it's the same thing with plant seeds. When they release those, the first couple of leaves come out, they all pretty much look the same, at least to the untrained eye. But we were talking about RF energy, and it's also interesting that a lot of this stuff produces energy as it's growing. It releases energy. And I'll end the topic just by saying one of the ways that you can actually tell that early growth is releasing energy if you happen to live in an area with a lot of skunk cabbage. And in a year where we have late snowfalls, the skunk cabbage will start poking through the snow and will melt the snow around it as it starts growing, because it produces a heat byproduct and it grows so rapidly. But anyway, interesting stuff to me, maybe not to you, but I also have some microgreens growing from an interesting company called Hamama. You can look them up. They sell these really easy to use seed mats that you just water and you get microgreens out of it. It's pretty cool. I love watching stuff grow. So anyway, all right. So Jim, K2BHM, is here, and I want to see who else is here. We have a few people who have checked in on YouTube here, which is cool. And I'll see who's here on the radio. So to check in, you're going to give me your call sign, your name, and your location. Please come now.
All right, I'll start it off, I guess. Here is A2AS, Adam, out of Poughkeepsie. I'm on the wrong frequency. N3UIQ. Control. Here is KB2GGF Matt in Kerhonkson. Control. This is KD2TVS Move, Westmouth.
All right. So we have Adam, AE2AN from Poughkeepsie. Welcome, Adam. I think it's the first time I've checked you into my net here. Paul, N3EYQ, up in Rosenblooming, Coddle-Kilton. Matt, KB2GGF in Kerhonkson. And Lou, KD2TVS in West Milford. Anybody else before I pass it off to Jim? All right, Jim, K2BHM. The floor is yours. Or, I mean, or the chair.
I don't know what to say. Yeah, I'm open to all topics. Whatever comes up tonight, we'll bat it around and see what comes up. We seem to do okay with that. Surprisingly enough, we seem to be able to have somebody here that knows something about what subject matter pops up as. Back to you, KWHM.
No, I agree. We can pretty much go in any direction here. So as we pass it around, is there something that interests you at the moment, something that's puzzling you at the moment, or, here's a twist, something that really fascinated you as a kid and that you didn't figure out till you were an adult? Anyway, there's some good stuff there. All right, let's talk about SDRs. It's definitely a possibility. I have to pump up my SDR presentation that I have. I did one a number of years ago for HRU, and it's an SDR presentation aimed more at the beginners, and then it goes into an equipment roundup, which I do with my kit presentation too, but I'm going to spruce that up so I can do it again, because things have changed over the last few years. Anyway, Adam, AE2AN, what would you like to talk about tonight?
Throw me on the hot seat. Well, I really don't have a topic. I was more coming into to listen and learn.
Well, that's fine. Something will pop up here, and we'll throw you into the conversation. And anybody else online who has anything in YouTube here, you can throw your suggestions into the chat. Paul, N3EYQ, what's up tonight?
Just got off work at 7:30, so I had no idea what I was going to think about. Maybe later on we can try to figure out why my Linux machine decided to rewrite my bootstrap for Windows, but and I can't bring it back. But that's something else. N3EYQ.
Oh, that's always fun. And I've found a couple of ways around it sometimes. Sometimes you can get around it. There's a couple different utilities that might get you out of that, but we can hit that. So, all right. Matt, KB2GGS, what's going on down in Carhunction land?
Well, good evening. Also, it's a radio fun here in Carhunction land. The propagation conditions have been very variable lately. 1 hour it's all flat and no signals anywhere, and the next hour it's going crazy. So yeah, it's been interesting making some good contacts. Couple of things you mentioned. You said what fascinated you as a child. Well, when you said that, I immediately thought of the two little science toys that always fascinated me. One is the radiometer, which is a bulb, it looks like a light bulb, and it's got a pinwheel inside that has cards that are black on one side, white on the other. And in the sun, or even a strong desk lamp, it'll spin on a pin, and it's just from the light hitting it. And I always thought that was so cool. And the other little science toy that amazed me when I was a child was gyroscopes, gyroscopic tops, and you could make them ride a tight walk on a string and do other tricks with them. They were really cool. So think of that. And the other thing is a very down-to-earth, practical sort of thing. I'm building a board. I'm going to put it in an enclosure, and I'm going to put it in an Altoids tin. Now, I haven't looked this up online, and I just was sort of thinking it for myself. If you're going to put holes in an Altoids tin, how would you do it? Well, I said make a block of wood that fits really nicely inside and drill through it. But perhaps someone has a better idea for putting holes in Altoids tins. So that's kind of mundane. But anyway, back to net. KV2PGF.
All right, Matt. Oh, interesting stuff. I'm going to give you one really cool recommendation with the Altoids tin, not about drilling holes, but something else in case you want to take a look at it. But radiometer, so there's something that kind of relates to that fascination I always had with, energy, coming from something that's not normally visible being turned into something that is visible. Not visible as much as observable, which is what we're talking about with RF energy, pulling energy out of the air and creating something observable with it. And whereas, yes, with a radiometer, you're talking about infrared energy, pretty much, light energy, which is observable, but you're converting that to kinetic energy, which is kind of cool. And I remember, being taught more than once over the years how it actually worked, but, God help my brain if it remembers. We talked about QRPme.com, QRPME.com. That's Rex Harper's company. And he makes a couple of products in his Me Pads, Me Squares line that are basically prototyping boards that fit into an Altoids tin, which is kind of cool. So you can build an entire circuit by bridging the various pads that you need to and just soldering to them. So just another interesting thing to look at. But one of the things you can also do with his stuff is you can glue the Me Squares and Me Pads right inside of the Altoids tin and use the metal of the Altoids tin as your ground plane. Construct a whole circuit on that. So just another interesting thing you can look at in his stuff. I do believe Rex has a terrible web page, but you'll find your way around it. W2NDG for ID. And next up is Lou, KD2TVS. All right, so you've got the gist of where we're going here, Lou. What do you have for us tonight?
Good evening, Neil. And the open topic has been so far so good. I can't really think of anything. The SDR would be an interesting topic. I only played with those a little bit back in the beginning, just before I even went and got my my tech license. That was when I was getting the curiosity of ham radio, and went and bought one of those little Rtl Sdr. It's like that little dongle you plug into your USB port on your computer. I think paid something like $20 or something like that on where did I get that? Amazon, actually. Yeah, plugged it in. Comes with a lousy, crappy antenna, that little thing on a tripod or something like that. But I could get at the time I could play with it. That's why I started getting my little bit of a knowledge of you need the proper antenna. We just reset. So yeah, I used it. I was getting the hang of actually playing with the software and actually understanding about the length of antennas and stuff, proper length for proper frequency and stuff like that. So, but I never actually hooked it up to an actual antenna outside. So it's something eventually I'll have to try playing with again. And actually this time, once I get those HF antennas up or one or the other, I'm sure one hopefully, and I'll plug into that and see what I can pick up. But I thought it was an interesting little concept that you can listen to on such a simple little device, It's a good curiosity, I guess, for kids, I guess. And we're all kids, I guess, at one point or another when our curiosity gets to us. Let me just reset. But, I have a 15-year-old grandson. Maybe I'll just send him one of those and see if it sparks a little bit of interest in as far as listening to radio. At least you can't get in trouble. You can't transmit on it. At least not that one. So you can't get into trouble because the spark is interesting. And I had the other thing was I was just looking at those radiometers. I was wondering what Matt was talking about, but it's interesting. those. And I remember, I forget, it was, I don't know if you said knee pads or some kind of little pads that you use for those. I remember you talking about those in that little, I think it was a Tuesday night class. You were talking about kit building, and you were talking about those particular, I remember I got the presentation saved somewhere on a PDF file and stuff that, and as far as the presentation that you put out with all those kits and stuff that you can work with. So I thought that was interesting too. So I'll let you actually decide what we're going to expand upon, but either one of those topics were pretty good. Back to you, Neil. KD2 TVS.
All right, Lou. Yeah. And yes, you're right. I did talk about knee pads and knee squares on the kit building thing. It's one of the things that's in that discussion. And they're really cool. The little squares, knee squares, you break them up from a board, and glue them down to a sheet of copper. And basically, you lay them out for the components to be soldered to in the layout of the schematic that you're working off of. And you solder components between the pads, and component gets soldered directly to the copper. If you are, soldering one end of a component to ground. And you just build out from one corner and try to keep it within the confines of the board, but follow your schematic. It's sometimes a good idea to look at the schematic and redraw it with the squares in mind. But either way, there's some people who have put together some really excellent looking circuits using those things. Knee pads, which is the other thing in the same line, are pads for standard and surface mount integrated circuits and some other things. He even has them for tubes, so that you can put tubes into your circuit with one of these knee pad, knee square type of builds. But definitely neat. The Rtl Sdr. So we can hit a little of the history of that thing. I've worked with them quite a bit, as has Jim. There's so much you can do with those little devices, and they started life, and still are really, as European digital TV dongles. European digital television, over-the-air digital is what we're talking about, is a completely different format than what we use here in the States, and you're not going to use one of these to watch TV here. But very early on, when these things were becoming really popular, there was a company that created an SDR dongle using similar technology. And it was for listening to a very specific satellite and experimenting with that. Some really bright hams made the connection and figured out that they could kind of reverse engineer the drivers and basic libraries that were used to make this thing work, to work with the European TV dongles, or RTL dongles. And the software and the drivers have evolved since then. And a few companies take the basic design. I think they're buying the basic boards or even the dongles themselves from sources and souping them up, adding things like temperature compensated crystal stability to them, and beefing up a few other things like cooling, because those of you who have played with these knows they get hot. It's a couple of companies that make, souped up ones that aren't frightfully expensive still, like the Rtl Sdr blog, Rtl Sdr, and they sell them right through their webpage, and they used to sell them on Amazon too. Don't buy them from eBay under that name, because a lot of them are counterfeit. And then a couple other companies make souped up ones. And what's cool about these things is, for a minimal investment, $10, $12, $15 for a generic one, 30 for one of the nice like Rtl Sdr blog ones. You get a radio that, without any modifications at all, will receive about 25 or 28 megahertz up to about 1.2 gigahertz, sometimes a little higher. They have different ranges depending on which version and which brand of tuner chip they use. And then, because it's just a USB connection to get control and audio into your computer, it's pretty easy, and it's supported by a number of different software packages. But one of the ones that's really commonly used is called SDR Sharp. And you get this thing going, and you can sit there and tune into all these different frequencies. There's lots of cool plugins made for SDR Sharp and some of the other software that lets you use it as a scanner. There's ways to decode digital FM signals like DMR and D-Star. There's ways to track the newer transponders in aircraft and actually load the data onto a map and look at where the planes are. There's ways to track ships at sea on the thing, similarly with a map. And as Jim and I, a couple of years ago now, Jim, I think, we were playing with it on the air, and we were using it to tap into the stream from our weather stations using a program called Rtl 433. And there's a lot of license-free equipment using various license-free allowed bands at low power. And that's one of the devices you can pop into. When I was playing around with mine, I got my weather station, a couple of smart meters in the neighborhood, and tire pressure sensors just pumping out data about my tires. Anyway, neat stuff, and very versatile. And with some very basic mods, which are included with some of them, including the Rtl Sdr blog model, you can actually use it also to monitor HF. So you're talking about, 500 kilohertz or lower, all the way up into the over gigahertz range. Definitely a versatile device for $30-odd. So are there negatives? Of course. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Net. In that price range, there are a couple of negatives. The better ones do perform better, but they all inherently have a couple of shortcomings. One of them is dynamic range. And I used to witness this even with the better one that I had in my old neighborhood on Long Island. I lived very close to a very powerful repeater. And when that thing would go on the air, the signal strength would just drop out of everything. It doesn't have fantastic dynamic range, but some are definitely better than others, and they've improved. The other issue is the ones that use what we call direct sampling for picking up HF are at a reduced sensitivity. You have to hook them up to a pretty good antenna to really to get anything on them, but they do work. The other way to get HF out of them is to use a down converter, and those are a little more sensitive, but a little more complex to use. But definitely a cool device. If you haven't waded into those waters and it sounds interesting, you can always hit me up. Everybody knows how to get a hold of me, and I can send some links out or make some recommendations of where to start. But it's definitely something cool to play with. So let me drop one more time. Another thing, Matt's talk about the radiometer is Paul N3EYQ suggested that this might be related to our RF energy talk, and he's right. So Matt, remind me, and we'll weave that into the RF energy night. Gyroscopes, definitely something that fascinates a lot of kids. If you've ever played with one of the really big ones, you ever seen somebody standing on a turntable playing with a really big, gyroscopic wheel, and seeing what it does to your own motion on the wheel, depending on which way you tilt it, stuff like that is very fascinating. And the other thing that I run into in my own job, dealing with gyroscopes, is, I still have to play with spinning hard drives. And when you pop a 3.5-inch hard drive, out of a desktop dock for copying, or a number of other, ways that you might be holding one while it's still powered up or recently powered up. It has a gyroscopic effect. You'll find it has a resistance when you try to turn it while it's still spinning, and it'll just feel kind of strange. Your hand will want to automatically move into like a circular spiral kind of motion. It's a weird feeling, and it would be very familiar to anybody who's ever played with a gyroscope. But yeah, that's one of those things that you don't think about much. But if you've never had to handle a powered up spinning hard drive, that's what happens. Especially with the newer ones where the housings are pretty light. They've really cheapened up the housings. They're not so heavy anymore, so you get to a point where the heaviest thing in that drive is the storage platter itself, and that's what's spinning. So yeah, neat stuff. Let me drop and hand it to Jim for comments on everything we've talked about. K2BHM, your turn. From W2NDG.
Thanks, Bill. I've been kind of sidetracked. Paul, are you trained to dual boot Ubuntu and Windows 10?
I was going to reference that. Sometimes Paul cuts out for fire calls, but Paul, if you're there, we want to dig into your Linux thing a little real quick. Yeah, he might be on a fire call, Jim.
Talking to me? I just stepped out of the room for 2 seconds.
Yeah, let's see if I got it. Are you trained to dual boot Ubuntu and Windows 10?
It was something I kind of installed on a USB stick, and it rewrote my my bootstrap on the hard drive. It's like, oh, why did you do that? So I got to have the Ubuntu stick on to boot my Windows system now. And I don't know, it's just driving me nuts.
So you did have a dual boot, and Windows took over and won't let you get the grub anymore?
No, the other way around. I can't get my Windows. If I pull the USB stick out, Windows won't boot.
Okay, different scenario. Yeah, I had problems with dual booting Ubuntu and Windows. Once Windows moves up, it clobbers grub, and it will only boot Windows. But you've got the opposite problem.
It might have been the way I installed it. I wanted it installed on a USB stick. If I want Ubuntu or Linux Ubuntu, I just want to be able to put the thing in there and boot from there. But somehow or another, it took over the whole system and it rewrote, and Grub rewrote something on the master boot record on the hard drive. Like, oh, come on. I mean, that's what I tried to avoid.
So when grub comes up, will it bring you a menu, or can you scroll down to access the Windows boot?
Oh yeah, I can boot Windows. It's not a big issue, but I have to have the USB stick in to get the machine to boot up. If I pull the USB stick out, Windows won't boot. So I tried a few things and it doesn't work. I mean, this is something for later, maybe off the net.
Yeah, because that's going to be a complicated issue because grub did not get installed on the master boot record. It's on the USB stick, need to get it over to the master boot record. So it's the first thing that the computer sees when it goes up. And that's going to be a bit of Googling and doing some command line interfaces to force that to happen.
I thought I'd be able to do a system restore and fix the boot record, but it's been told me, oh, I need stop administrator something to do something. I'm like, what do you mean administrator? This is driving me nuts because it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, Grub should have been installed on the master boot record of the primary drive, so it would be the first thing that you see. And apparently that got wiped, so it's looking for it on the USB stick now. So if you don't have the USB stick in, what does it default to?
It defaults to like,
Yeah, you need to reinstall Grub.
Well, we'll play with this offline later. It's more annoying than anything. You know, when Grub does things, it's trying to take over the system. And usually, what I end up doing is try to unplug the hard drive off out of the computer when I do this. So I'm installing it without anything seeing any Windows hard drive in there. You know, that way I can put the USB stick in there and boot Ubuntu or Linux right up the USB stick, or if I pull the USB stick out, it'll boot Windows normally.
Yeah, no, I ran into a very frustrating problem trying to do a dual boot with Ubuntu and Windows 10. Even though Grub is up and running, when you bring Windows up, Windows goes and trashes Grub and makes it so that only Windows will boot after that. And there's a process that you have to go into Windows and turn off something and reestablish Grub as the primary boot device. And then you get in there and you can go into Windows or Grub, Ubuntu or whatever, and everybody's happy. But you've got a different problem.
So right now it's working if I keep the USB stick in there. So until I figure out how to restore the Windows drive to a Windows pure system, I'll be fine.
Yeah, just do a Google on reinstalling Grub on the master boot record, and that should talk you through it.
All right. The other thing, we started talking. Somebody was talking about the little black and white things in the light bulb thing. What do you call that thing? I forget what you called it. I kind of made a comment on the website there. Like, is light a photon? If it's a photon, a particle, or a wave? Because I remember reading something about that years ago. I was doing some research here about that, and interesting, to say the least. You know, it's all quantum physics and all this other stuff.
Yes, it's very interesting. Light does exhibit properties of both a particle and a wave. So, but that's a very deep discussion for later on. Anyhow, I kind of lost track. Let me turn it back over to Neil and see where we're going. KWHM.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, the world of bootloaders did get, well, it gets more complicated as both of the operating systems evolve. Because even Grub isn't the same as it used to be as we get into UEFI systems and everything else. I had the reverse happen also that Paul is seeing, where I had a Windows update take out one of my few dual boot setups. And sometimes I've been able to get everything back by using a third-party utility. There's some third-party boot utilities out there that come on some of these toolkit USBs that you can burn. And there's even the bootloader that's built into Windows, BCD. There's a product that'll manage BCD called Easy BCD, which does allow you to do some multi-booting, and I've played with that as well. I actually used that to get multi-boot working on a Hackintosh that I built, if anybody knows what that is, but that was quite some time ago. Joe, NE2Z, who is on YouTube participating, said sometimes you're really better off just getting an old laptop, dropping an SSD in it, and just using that if you want to play with Linux. And I agree. And that's what I've been doing. And Paul, if you want an old laptop to play with to do it, I have spares, because everybody knows, because I keep offering them to people. And I wouldn't mind getting rid of some of them. But yeah, I have a few extras here. And I've been playing around with Linux again a little more lately, because I do deal with it at work quite a bit. And there's a lot of people out there who really like Arch Linux, which is something different. And what I've been playing with is a Linux distribution called Endeavor. And Endeavor Linux takes Arch Linux and packages it in a bit of an easier to use package, easier to install anyway. And I really like the way it works. I've been very impressed with it. And it does kind of force you to use the command line a little bit, but it's easy. So Endeavor Linux, that was definitely impressive for me. I like it. So usually I stick with one of the lightened up Ubuntu varieties, either Xubuntu or Linux Lite, which is very similar to Xubuntu. Linux Lite's kind of like a very light version of Linux Mint, kind of. But those are the ones I usually use at work. It's Red Hat, or some of the derivatives used to be CentOS, but now we're looking at one of the other free projects that's popped up in its place because they ended the regular updates to CentOS, replaced it with something else. So, unfortunately, that's one of the few negatives I always say to Linux, is that it's still very fragmented. There's still too many different flavors of it, but the experimenters and home users like Ubuntu and its derivatives, and the professional engineering types and strict command line Unix Linux users are still in that Red Hat world. So they kind of butt heads quite a bit. And there's definitely some prejudice there, as when I mention Ubuntu to a couple of our departments that are really deep into all of this cluster computing and everything. I get funny looks. I feel like I'm being persecuted. But anyway, I do what the users need. And a lot of times the users are running software that says, you need Ubuntu. So that's what we deploy. Anyway, Jim, anything else with what we've been over here? Quite a lot of topics.
Well, I have to admit that Windows is so user-friendly and so out there and so necessary and so forth and so on that my last laptop, I put Ubuntu on it and didn't do a dual boot. And I don't miss it. But basically, no matter what you're taking, Ubuntu or Red Hat or Slackware or Mint or whatever, it's all the same kernel. So it's the same basic operating system. The only difference is what they give you GUI-wise, graphical user interface, to get to the kernel, because the kernel is the crux of it. It does all the hard work. The the different flavors give you different ways to get there, different icons, different flowery, appealing mannerisms, whatever. But it's the kernel that's actually doing the work. So if you really are doing command line interface, you wouldn't know the difference between one or the other. So anyhow, that's my 2 cents. Back to you, KQBHM.
Well, as I know I talked with Jerry about it on here one night. I don't 100% understand some of the controversies that are going on now, but unfortunately, Jim, it's not the case anymore. Is they're making some fundamental changes, not to the kernel itself, but to basics of how some of the Linux distros actually work, having to do with scripting and automation, and that there's different command line interpreters as well. That some people replace one with another. There's a whole argument as to why people still want to use VI as their editor when Nano or Emacs is so much easier. There is a lot of differences still as to what they emphasize, but that's probably another night. Maybe we do a whole other thing on Linux and its current state and where it's going, because there's definitely some divisions right now on where they're taking some of this. So, and with that, we should probably see if there's anybody else out there who wants to check in. What do you think?
Yeah, VI, Nano, or whatever. They're all different ways to get to the kernel. And what you do with the kernel after that is wide open. And there's a lot of different things going on. There's different packages, different ways of installing software and stuff like that. But it all basically boils down to whatever you put onto the system still has to interface with the kernel to make things actually happen. So there is one kernel, and everybody attaches to that. So, yeah, there is an actual whole website devoted just to the kernel, and Linus Torvalds is basically overseeing that. So it's his baby.
Back to some of the comments here. Yeah, Joe brought up Windows 10 having the Linux subsystem available now, and it is interesting. It does work. I have actually used it in a couple of the labs at work that just needed, basically a Linux shell to run some, advanced scripts on, and it does work. It did exactly what they needed to do. So it's not quite a virtual machine. It's interesting, a little different. The things that I'm mostly talking about, and once again, I really have to learn more about it. Jerry had brought up systemd, is that some Linux distributions are not using it and going in a different direction. And there's also a controversy right now with some of the different distributions of the basic folder structure of Linux and changing some of the norms that have been in place going back to the Unix days. So that's more of what I was talking about. There is some evolution going on right now that changes things from system to system. Also, when you're dealing with things like modifying and building graphics drivers in something like Red Hat compared to Debian or Ubuntu, there are definitely differences in how they've set the systems up and how they manage some of those additional plugins, overlays, whatever you want to call it, in driver management. So it's not as simple as it used to be, unfortunately. And when you go from one to another, things can get really funky. For instance, NVIDIA drivers in the Red Hat world are a real headache for us. And we use a lot of NVIDIA machines for GPU compute in the Linux world where I work. And you run one update and kaboom, nothing works. Lots of fun. So that's more of what I was talking about. Let's see if anybody else wants to join in. We're probably only going to do one more round after we see who else is out there. But anybody else want to check in tonight? Come now with your call sign, your name, and your location. All right. Nothing heard. Yeah, Joe mentioned SDR Angel. Thanks, Joe. I've played with SDR Angel. I even managed to get it to load on my Mac. It's definitely a neat piece of software. And for those of you who haven't looked at it, it's an SDR software package that kind of does a little of everything. It's a bunch of different things rolled into one, including the ability to decode the digital signals, like I mentioned earlier. I find it very interesting. And the fact that it does so much is really cool. The only negative I have to it is the same thing I feel about software packages like, what am I thinking of? Ham Radio Deluxe, where it just, to me, sometimes feels like, a handful of separate programs that were glued together. It makes it a little cumbersome at times, but the difference is that Ham Radio Deluxe has been around forever, and they've had the ability to make it more integrated and not feel like a whole bunch of separate programs. But the SDR Angel is still in its infancy and should evolve into something really neat. So that's definitely something worth looking at. All right. So we've gone in many different directions here tonight. But I can kick it back up to the top to Jim, and you'll understand a little more maybe what I was talking about. Especially when you deal with Linux at home, none of this stuff really comes up. Even when you're dealing with it for basic experimenting in ham radio and home control, but when you're dealing with it in a scientific environment and professional computing environments, that's when things start to get a little weird. So, Jim, K2BHM, that and anything else brought up, like, let's see, well, the Rtl Sdrs specifically, which you did some really cool work on those a couple of years ago when we were talking about it.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. K2BHM, Jim here back again. Yeah, I did see, well, I noticed that there's lots of new package managers available now. There was Deb and the Red Hat RPK or RPG. But there's different methodologies now for installing packages to check for dependencies and so forth and so on. And I did see something recently where they're starting to deviate from the normal location of things. Certain files would put in BIN and SBIN and ETC and USR and BAR and so forth, and they're starting to modify them and change them. But I'm not sure how that really affects the basic kernel itself, because that's all external, and you still need to get the command into the kernel, and good things to happen. So, anyhow, and yeah, SDR. I was playing with it for a while. That 433 program was very interesting. I was able to read out my accurate weather stations and remote stations and find other people's remote stations and the power line watt meters and stuff like that, tire pressure monitor. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff out there that uses 433. So, and I think it's also used for garage door openers too. I'm not sure. I don't have a garage door opener, so. But anyhow, yeah. I don't know what else to add to it, so I'll toss it back to you, K2BHM.
Yeah. It would help if I keyed the right mic. And I'll repeat that here. It would help if I keyed the right mic. Trying to think of a term, and it's escaped me. For the devices that use 433, they call it the something band. I think somebody on YouTube probably knows this answer. And no, I don't mean LoRa. ISM. ISM refers to the radio applications that exist within a number of different bands that are license free, basically, for the purposes of what they're doing. And they're usually very low power. And Jim and I mentioned a few of them. Obviously the weather stations, which was kind of cool to see plain text coming out of your weather station that you could read. And it probably wouldn't be hard to scrape and parse that with a script and basically load it into your own web page. Then there's we were talking about the tire pressure sensors, smart meters. There's things like driveway sensors, little trip beams that you can put on if you have a really long driveway, and then alerts you to somebody coming in the driveway. And they all use these ISM bands, but they're not necessarily always on 433 megahertz. It's just that utility. It's called RTL 433 because most of the things that it is capable of recognizing and decoding happen to be on that particular band. But there are other ISM bands all over the place, and your dongle can receive and decode a lot of them. So neat stuff. Adam, AE2AN, are you still with us? I know it's been a while since you came up to the top of the list, but I think we'll make this our final round because, like I said, it's been a long day. Anything else you would like to add before we go into just casual discussion here? We may have put Adam to sleep. He was in the chat here before too, but he said he had to leave the room, so that's fine. If you are still listening, Adam, thanks for checking in tonight. I really appreciate it. It's good to hear you on here. Paul, N3EYQ. I know we're confusing the heck out of you, but you'll get it down. But once again, if you just want to do this with an old laptop, maybe let me know. Your turn, Paul.
Oh, I've got a laptop here with Windows 8 on dual boot. Works fine. I just didn't want to have this machine dual boot. That's all. Trying to just set it up that way. Other than that, not much going on. Oh, sneaking out of the room. I saw that. Oh, well. What was I chatting about? I was on a call chatting about it. We're just doing yakking back and forth. It's probably nothing important. I know. We'll probably deal with that next week. Particles or waves and radios and radio waves and all the I don't know. Kind of like Easy Pass. I remember you were talking about that the other day. How Easy Pass works. This is all the same thing that I think you wanted to focus in on next week. So, other than that, I don't really have much to go on here. I was just trying to figure out how to restore my system to normal. That's all.
No problem, Paul. And Easy Pass, one of the examples. Actually, the ID badges, RFID stuff is really part of that whole discussion on RF energy, and it's really kind of cool how it ties into that. So, Neat stuff. And yes, I did leave the room. Why did I leave the room? Because the cat that some of you have observed some nights that we're here climbs up on me and hangs out while we're talking was howling. And I wanted to just check why, make sure she wasn't stuck somewhere real quick. But I think she's howling because my daughter's home. She's been away all weekend, and she's saying, "You're home, and I want you to be here, sitting with me, paying attention to me." So they're very close. Yeah, RFID stuff, definitely cool. It's how that stuff works. The Easy Pass is part of that whole combination of devices, but the Easy Pass people cheat a little bit, and we'll talk about that next week. So, all right, Matt, KB2GGF, you still with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Neil. But I am fading fast. The pollen is kicking my butt around town. I don't like the pollen in the springtime, but well, you get the idea. Anyhow, very interesting net tonight. I really enjoyed it. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Neil and Jim, and catch you later. KB2 GGF. Back to net.
Well, thanks, Matt. And we're talking about particles, particle energy. Pollen's particles. You think we can harness the power of a sneeze? What do you think, Matt?
My father has a sneeze that would rival Hoover Dam for power.
Isn't that Force 10 from Neverland?
Stand clear. 73, everybody. Good night.
Good night, Matt. Take care of yourself. My favorite thing for that before bed is the Celestial Seasonings Sleepy Time Sinus Soother, they call it. Great tea. All right. I'll catch you here next week. I'm sure I'll talk to you before then. KD2TVS, Lou. So where did this all go? I know I gave you a long speech on Rtl Sdr.
Thank you, Neil. Yeah, that was informative on the RTLs and on that topic. I mean, like I said, I bought one. I listened to a little VHF on it, but never got. That was until I got my radio, my first Yates. So that kind of like entertained me for a little while and got me to figure out frequencies and stuff like that. So it's a good little learning tool in the beginning for somebody just starting up in amateur radio. And conversation, let me see, turned into, quite a bit, pretty deep and as far as that. So that's actually pretty good. Got a lot of info. Took a lot of notes. So that was good. And if you can, I guess, put up something, maybe got some links or something like that where you can probably read up a little bit. One question, SDR strictly used as far as those dongles, or I've seen little units that are not dongles themselves, but, like maybe a little box or something like that. And was wondering if they can you transmit with them, like URP, some low power or something like that? Or is it strictly just all receive? Back to you, Neil. KB2TVS.
That's a great question. And this is where it gets very interesting, because the term SDR, software defined radio, if you pick it apart, it's the replacement of some radio hardware with software. If you're familiar with something called computer emulation, let's say, and this is going in a completely different direction, but it's a similar concept. And that's where, if you own a Linux computer, like we were talking about, when you wanted to be able to run a Windows program once in a while, you can emulate an entire computer inside of your Linux machine. And we call virtual machines. This is a way now that a lot of enterprises are running. So like where I work, a lot of the servers that we access for databases or applications don't really exist anymore. They're virtual. They're all emulated in software. And it gives you, anytime you can take something that's physical and recreate it virtually with software, it gives you an incredible amount of flexibility with what you can do with it. So when we look at software-defined radio, what we're doing is we're taking a lot of the function of radio and emulating it with software. And it gives us the ability to process a lot of, the analog of radio in the digital domain. And that's why SDRs, if you play around with the software, you have incredible noise reduction and filtering and things like a notch filter, where you can visually place a notch filter onto a signal that you see in your waterfall display. It just gives an incredible amount of flexibility. And are there transmitters? Yes. And here's where it gets really cool. One of the most popular transceivers in ham radio right now, the Icom Ic 7300, is a software-defined radio, self-contained. So the computer portion of it is part of the HF rig and giving you a nice display. Most of the new modern transceivers that are coming out right now are SDR based. Let me drop. W2NDG on the OMARC Sunday night Science and Technology Net. A lot of this stuff is SDR based. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And radios like the Elecraft KX3, KX2, the new IC705 from Icom that everybody's been talking about. I believe the Yaesu 991A, which is another one everybody's been talking about, and there are two newer transceivers that came out up the line from that. A lot of this equipment is SDR based, and you can take something, an SDR design and self-contain it with a computer. The rig that I keep talking about, and everybody's tired of me talking about it, but I can't stop because I just think it's so cool, is the True SDX. And what's neat about that is that the guy who wrote the software for it managed to shoehorn an SDR transceiver onto a processor that shouldn't be able to run it. But he did the impossible and just made a radio that's so incredibly efficient, power-wise, that it's just cool. So you have a little handheld SDR rig, 5 bands, 5 watts, that fits in the palm of your hand. That is where all of this technology is taking us right now. And it's really cool to experiment with it. But if you really want to play with SDRs at the basic level as a transceiver, there is a project out there. It's a little technical for a beginner, but it isn't quite as technical as some of this stuff you can get into. One more drop. You'll find them used on eBay sometimes. Sometimes the original creator is still selling them new, but it's the Soft Rock line of radios. And he makes a transceiver, he makes a receiver only, and this is a ham named Tony Parks. I have a couple of the transceivers, and they use it's a type of SDR that uses the sound card in your computer, uses what they call an I and a Q channel, or in phase and quadrature. And it takes 2 audio signals, pumps it into your sound card, and your computer runs software that deciphers these audio signals into readable analog audio and your waterfall display and everything else. So you're running 2 audio cables between this radio and your sound card. If you're going to do transceiving, you need 2 sound cards to make it work correctly. So you can transmit and receive simultaneously. Keeps things separate. But anyway, Yeah, SoftRock RXTX. The company that sells them is called 5 Dash. I think it's spelled out FIVEDASH, but I can double check that. So that's FIVEDASH, 5dash.com. And Tony sells them as kits, but you can get them assembled out of them also. The kit does have a little bit of surface mount soldering, but it's not too bad. But yeah, you can get them assembled. I think I have a spare if it's something you really wanted to experiment with. But there are a couple other software-defined radios that are similar. And when I put together that presentation, it'll have some of those in it. Just interesting stuff. There's a few basic ones that you can get into without a huge investment that'll really teach you how it all works. So there's even an experimenter platform called HackRF, which is more for experimenting, less for using as a ham transceiver, but it can be the basic building block for one if you want. But yeah, SDR is the way everything is going. Either SDR or we call it DSP transceivers, which is kind of what your Baofeng handhelds are. Radio on a chip, as we call it. So how's that explanation? Back to you, Lou.
It was great, actually. That's a lot of information. Took a bunch of notes there. But yeah, I'll look into that. I thought it was cool after I Eric's radio, seeing the waterfall displays and all that stuff, and how easy it is to actually go. Once you have your radio, I'll find out where people are talking at just by looking at the screen. I know the more expensive radios have them. They're pretty cool. They're expensive. They're great, but they're pretty cool displays that they have on there. I guess, and probably way more features than the average users. But it's nice to know that with SDR, you can. I guess they keep the price of a lot of stuff down because they can just I guess they could just multi-produce those things left and right. Well, other in today's world, there's some chip shortages, but I'm sure that some of them are out there. They're probably experimenting with a lot of them. But thanks for all that info, Neil. Appreciate it. And I'll look a little bit up on it and see what else I found. And I'll be looking forward to that SDR little class or little seminar you're gonna be doing, and not supporting that. But it's the last round. I wish you all, yourself and everyone on the net, a terrific week. Stay safe, enjoy the great weather, and we'll talk next Sunday night. So, KD2 TVS. Lou, back to you.
Well, thanks, Luke. And yeah, it's a really fascinating topic. And there are, there's expansions to the subject that are coming that are going to make it really, really interesting. And there's related topics too. So, I'll say being able to process a large swath of, radio spectrum at one time is interesting. The fact that you can then record it. So let's say, your SDR is able to pick up the entire 80 meter band at one time. And this is where it gets even cooler. You can record the whole 80 meter band with your SDR software and play it back. So, and when you play it back, you can tune into different signals that you were listening to when you recorded. There's a whole, series of things you can do there. Where it's going is that there's a team that's working on developing SDR as it applies to quantum computing. And they said that someday, and of course, a lot of this is in its infancy on the quantum computing side, but when they're able to pull this off, they'll have, just like I was saying, something that can process a whole swath of spectrum at one time. But that swath of spectrum will be the entire radio spectrum, or at least a huge portion of it. That's insane, but it's something that's going to be possible. And it relates to other technologies. We have photographers among us, I'm sure. Light field technology was the photography version of this, where you take a picture of, they call it light field, and then digitally process it afterwards. And that's where you take an image of a huge area of information, and then after you capture all that information, focus on various things, filter various things out, change all the different parameters that you would normally be changing in live photography, and make different versions of the same photograph. Just another way to look at it, and it's similar technology. So, Paul, are we looking for ET with SDR? Sort of. It's that's something that's been done as well. But the whole point of it is that once you are processing analog radio in the digital domain, the possibilities are endless. So I have a timeout timer set on the new Yaesu here. Did I actually time out? I wonder if that actually works.
I get to me. You got keyed and come right back.
Oh, excellent. All right. So I think I set it just short of whatever the repeater does. Anyway, but yeah, it's a fascinating technology, and it's changing our hobby, and it's going to change a lot of things other than just our hobby, though. So thanks for bringing it up, Lou. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Any last minute check-ins before we throw it back up to Jim and wrap it up?
Neil, for one little short question. The topic that you just mentioned of photography, you called it light, something I couldn't remember at an old-timer moment, so write that down. Back to you, Neil, KD2 TVS.
And I heard KD2SQO in there. Let me answer Lou real quick, and then throw it over to KD2SQO. The Lou, it's called light field technology, or light field cameras. That's what it was described to me as. I'm not a photographer, but I play one on television. No, I'm not really heavily into photography, but when I first read about light field photography, it intrigued me because of its similar concept to something like SDR. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot, KD2 TVS.
All right, and Brian, KD2SQO. Anything you want to add tonight?
Yeah, KD2SQO here. I don't have something I said yet, but what is going on is I'm just listening and trying to learn more, and considering like an actual base unit. But it's amazing how it seems like there's newer stuff like every other month or something.
Well, the big manufacturers don't come up with stuff as often as we would like sometimes, but it's the small projects right now that are really flying, and there's some stuff around the corner. If you do like to build, or even have some of these projects that someone might have built for you, like the radios that come from Ashar Farhan out of India are really easy to build. It's like Lego. And I have one of his here. Matt has one. Really cool radios. But his next project is a like an 80 through 10 HF rig that I think it's supposed to put out 40 or 50 watts, and it's going to be SDR based. And it's like with all of his stuff, it'll be very affordable. And there's other stuff like that also around the corner. So, yes, that's what I was talking. Joe just popped up and said the SBITX. That's exactly what I was talking about, Joe. And it's interestingly enough, I think he's using a Raspberry Pi as the processing unit in it. So, which he just typed as I was saying. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting radio. The other multi-band transceiver project that's just around the corner that uses a lot of this technology is Hans Summers from QRP Labs. He's been working on a radio called the QSX for years, and I don't think it's that far away now, maybe another year or so. And it's also going to be a very affordable, and that one's only a 10-watt radio, as he's saying, but still really neat. And there's so much of that coming out. So keep tuned, Brian. Anything else? And then I'll throw it to Jim and we'll wrap it up.
All good, sir. And strong idea. Thank you, everybody, and have a good evening. 73.
All right, Brian, thanks for checking in. Jim, wrap up time. Any comments on all this stuff?
Thanks, Neil. K2BHM here. No, I was just nosing around and looking through my notes and stuff like that, and trying to find information, my notes on the 433 program for Actorite and other stuff, and got lost trying to find that. So, but anyhow, no more comments. Pretty much just reading the mail and throwing a few things here and there as we go along. So, back to you, K2BHM.
All right, Jim, thanks. And thanks for helping out tonight, as always. I really appreciate it. And no, I didn't fall asleep on the air. It means that I'm doing a lot better than I thought I was doing. So, all right. So let's pause and wrap things up. You have been listening to and or watching the OMARC Sunday Nights Science and Technology Net, brought to you by the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club and our repeater on 146.805 megahertz. Anybody is welcome to attend this net and any of the other nets offered on this repeater. You do not have to be an OMARC member, although we do invite you to check us out and become a member. If you want to check us out, our website is omarcclub.org, omarcclub.org. And please join us for the other nets heard on this frequency and one other frequency as well. Daily nets, 7 days a week at 8:35 and 6:30 p.m. The 8:35 on the 8:05 is a roundtable net, not a directed net, held by a rotating cast of OMARC characters. And it's just a net that was started to keep us all in touch at the beginning of the pandemic, and it has continued just to make sure everybody's okay, has what they need, and has the support of their ham community. The 6:30 p.m. net is similar, but a directed net, also using rotating hosts from the club. And you can stop by, tell us how your day went, tell us if you need anything, and ask any questions if something is puzzling you every day at 6:30. There are 3 8 p.m. nets held on this repeater. Mondays at 8 p.m. is the Undernet, Ulster Northern Duchess Readiness Net, group of hams that are tasked with educating each other about emergency preparedness and the technology involving emergency preparedness. Stop by at 8 p.m. and check out the net and come to some of the activities that the Under group is having on weekends at times. Really interesting stuff. Thursday nights, also at 8, Dave K2JLV hosts the Thursday Night Tech Net, which is a more ham-oriented technical net where the topics can run from anything from antennas to radio waves to computers and radio. So It's a great net. Thursday night can run 4, 5, 6 rounds into the night. Stop by. This net, of course, 8 p.m. Sunday nights. And our HF net now that we're affiliated with on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. You can stop by on 3835 kilohertz lower sideband at 5 p.m. You can check in early. There's usually somebody monitoring the frequency before 5, but that's a 5 p.m. HF net. Stop by and join in. We have people from all over the Northeast checking in now. Really cool stuff. This has been W2NDG, Neil from Highland on the Overlook Mountain Amateur Radio Club, Sunday night Science and Technology Net. And we will be back next Sunday. I am ending the YouTube stream now. So good night, YouTube people. And now I'm ending the net.